Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal after months of silently enduring life within a suffocating house built on illusion, where every smile was painted and every word laced with sugar-coated lies, Scout finally did the unthinkable. She spoke up. The quiet strength that had been simmering beneath her fragile exterior erupted with a clarity that even the most seasoned adults around her could not ignore. It wasn't a dramatic outburst or a fit of childish rebellion. No, it was a brave, composed declaration from a little girl whose spirit had outgrown the false comfort of a toxic home. What Scout did took courage far beyond her years. With the keen sensitivity of a child forced to grow up too soon, a child who had watched her world unravel behind closed doors, she gathered all the moments she had tucked away, the hushed arguments, the unnerving silences, the uneasy glances, and brought them to the one adult she still trusted, Alexis. Scout's voice trembled as she recounted the truth she had carried in solitude for far too long. She spoke of Willow's cold, controlling watchfulness, as though every move Scout made was a potential threat to secrets best left buried. She described the tension that pulsed through the house, the unnatural stillness before Drew erupted into inexplicable rage, and the long, dark silences that followed, moments when he retreated emotionally into himself, leaving a hollow shell behind. Alexis listened without interruption, her seasoned instincts recognizing immediately that this wasn't just a child's overactive imagination. It was a plea for rescue. And what shook Alexis the most wasn't the accusations themselves, but the clarity and conviction with which Scout delivered them. If a child, young, unfiltered, and painfully honest, could so plainly see the moral decay within the walls of that home, then the situation had long since crossed the line into danger. Within hours of that harrowing conversation, Alexis made arrangements. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. Scout needed to leave Drew's house, not eventually, not when it was convenient, but now. And so, Alexis helped facilitate her return to the Quartermain estate, a place where, despite its own storied dysfunctions, Scout could at least breathe. It was more than a move, it was a lifeline. Back at the mansion, she was reunited with Danny, her steadfast brother who understood more than he let on, and with Rocco, whose familiar presence felt like the last untouched corner of a happier childhood. Among them, Scout began to rediscover what it meant to feel safe, to feel seen, and most importantly, to feel like herself again. The Quartermain mansion, once a symbol of elite power and opulent scandal, transformed in those days into something softer and quieter, a sanctuary. No longer was it just the site of grand soirees and heated financial debates. Now, it cradled a girl who had just exposed her own pain to the world. And it offered her something she hadn't had in far too long, a place where truth was not punished, where emotion was not dismissed, and where the people around her wanted to protect, not possess. For Scout, returning to the mansion wasn't an act of retreat but a powerful declaration of autonomy. She had made her choice, and in doing so, she had shattered the illusion that her father's home was a place of love. More devastating than anything Scout had confessed was what her words implied, that the man she once adored, the man the nation lauded as a war hero and moral figurehead, was nothing more than a hypocrite hiding behind a polished facade. Drew had built his image carefully, capitalizing on every act of sacrifice, every hardship overcome, until he became untouchable. But in the end, it wasn't a political rival or investigative journalist who exposed him. It was his daughter. A little girl with no agenda, no strategy, just a heart broken too many times. Scout didn't mean to destroy Drew's image, she merely told the truth, and that truth was powerful enough to unravel everything. The members of the Quartermain family reacted with a mix of fury, protectiveness, and deep concern. Tracy, long suspicious of Willow's capabilities as a maternal figure, found validation in every word Scout had said. Her skepticism now transformed into cold determination. She and Alexis conferred in private, their voices low and urgent as they mapped out the steps that needed to be taken to protect Scout, not just physically, but emotionally and legally. Their conversation was not about vengeance or punishment. It was about shielding a child who had been left emotionally unguarded in a house that demanded silence and submission. They knew the stakes were high. They knew Drew would fight back. But they also knew that this time, they held the moral high ground, and that was a position neither of them would surrender. Scout's return was not a footnote in the family's history. It was a turning point. A reckoning. And for Alexis, it reignited a fire that had long been dimmed by years of personal battles and moral compromise. She saw in Scout not just a child in need, but a reflection of the younger version of herself, someone who once needed someone else to listen, to believe, and to act. Alexis would not fail this time. She would not stand by and let another generation of girls be gaslit, manipulated, or overlooked. Not on her watch. In the days that followed, the air in Port Charles grew thick with rumor and speculation. People whispered in the corridors of General Hospital, in the booths at Kelly's, and on the manicured lawns of the Quartermain estate. Some asked what really happened inside Drew's home. Others wondered what else Scout might reveal. But the most damning silence came from Drew himself. Because no matter how many statements he released, no matter how many allies he tried to rally, he could not erase the fact that his own daughter had chosen to leave. That her trust had been broken so deeply she had no choice but to seek shelter elsewhere. And Willow, once thought of as a quiet stabilizing force, now found herself under a microscope. Her controlling behavior, once passed off as concern, was now being dissected and reinterpreted through Scout's lens. The maternal role she had tried so hard to adopt was slipping through her fingers, and no one, not Carly, not Michael, not even Drew, seemed willing to defend her anymore. The consequences of years of hidden dysfunction were finally clawing their way to the surface, and Scout's courage had been the spark. In standing up for herself, she had unwittingly started a firestorm that could burn through every lie and leave only truth in its wake. Meanwhile, Drew was beginning to feel the slow, inescapable chill of isolation creeping in from every corner of his once familiar world. It wasn't loud or immediate, it was subtle, agonizing, and deeply personal. The same friends and allies who had once sung his praises now avoided eye contact, dodged phone calls, and offered only hollow platitudes when cornered. The silence was deafening, but nothing compared to the devastation he felt when Scout left without a single word of farewell. That quiet departure, a decision made with unflinching clarity by his own daughter, hit harder than any tabloid headline or public scandal ever could. It stripped Drew of the illusion that his image could shield him from consequences, revealing the raw truth that he had lost the one person whose faith in him was supposed to be unconditional. Desperate to regain some control over the narrative unraveling around him, Drew reached out to Alexis. He left voicemails, sent carefully worded text messages, even showed up at her office unannounced. But Alexis remained unreachable, deliberately so. Her silence wasn't born of pettiness, but of strategy. Unknown to Drew, Alexis had already begun compiling a meticulous legal case, one built not on conjecture or vengeance, but on evidence. She had listened to Scout with the ears of both a caring guardian and a former attorney, and what she heard disturbed her enough to act. She began collecting deleted text messages, reviewing Scout's statements about Willow's behavior, and logging timestamps from suspicious phone calls and inconsistencies in Drew's and Willow's whereabouts. The evidence was building slowly but powerfully, painting a picture of a household far from nurturing. While Drew continued his campaign of damage control, flooding social media with staged photos and performative captions designed to recast himself as a loving, misunderstood father, Scout sat in a sun-drenched bedroom at the Quartermain mansion, chronicling her thoughts in a leather-bound journal. There was a calm in her writing, not the erratic scribbles of a child in crisis, but the quiet reflections of someone finally able to exhale. She wrote about what it felt like to wake up without the fear of being scrutinized, to walk through a hallway without hearing raised voices behind closed doors, to be herself without the need to constantly perform a role that made others comfortable. In that room, surrounded by people who weren't perfect but were at least present in their intentions, Scout was rediscovering the autonomy she didn't know she had lost. Danny, her half-brother and confidant, remained a constant figure beside her. Although still too young to fully grasp the complex emotional and legal chaos unfolding around them, he instinctively knew what Scout needed: companionship, stability, and someone who wouldn't treat her like a pawn. He offered that freely, filling their days with sibling chatter, shared meals, and long hours of quietly reading together. Rocco, too, became a fixture in her new life. His visits, though casual, carried the unspoken warmth of a childhood friendship that had managed to survive the fractures of their family's adult conflicts. Each afternoon they spent playing in the gardens or sharing snacks in the den, chipped away at the anxiety that had taken root in Scout's spirit during her time in Drew's home. Back at the epicenter of the storm, Willow found herself facing a reckoning she had long believed she could avoid. Once seen by the family as a gentle, stabilizing influence, a teacher, a nurturer, someone who could bridge the gaps Drew left behind, Willow was now under silent indictment. The same reserved demeanor that once read as calm now seemed cold. Her structured parenting style, once praised as disciplined, now looked like manipulation in retrospect. And the rumors were spreading. Not just in whispers among the Quartermaines, but in quiet observations among Port Charles insiders who had always sensed something disingenuous behind her saccharine smile. Tracy, never one to ignore her instincts, took the lead in questioning Willow's continued access to Scout. Her previous doubts were now backed by hard evidence and emotional testimony. For her, it was no longer a matter of dislike, it was about protection. As Alexis and Tracy worked behind the scenes, a confidential family meeting was convened at the mansion. It was one of those gatherings where the tension was so thick it could be sliced with a knife. All the major players were present: Olivia, Ned, Brooke Lynn, Monica by speakerphone, and surprisingly, Michael. And it was Michael, usually reserved, always cautious, who made the most unexpected move of the day. With quiet resolve and a firm voice, he offered a solution no one saw coming. He would pursue guardianship of Scout. The room fell into stunned silence. Michael, the ever-diplomatic figure who had once taken custody of Avery from Sunny with a level of legal precision and emotional strength that still made headlines, was now volunteering to step into another family storm. But unlike Drew, Michael had the credibility. He had the legal acumen, the emotional maturity, and the track record to prove he could do it. More importantly, he had Scout's trust. She had always seen him as more than a cousin. He was a protector, someone who listened without judgment and acted without ego. Michael's proposal wasn't made to hurt Drew, though the sting was undeniable. It was made because someone had to step up. Someone who wasn't clouded by the need to preserve an image or defend a failing marriage. Someone who saw Scout not as an extension of his legacy, but as a child in need of a stable home. And while no decision was finalized that day, the tone had shifted permanently. For the first time, Drew was not just fighting public opinion, he was losing the confidence of his own family. And in Port Charles, where reputation is currency, that loss was more damaging than anything a courtroom could deliver. With a well-documented history of successfully winning custody of Avery in a heated and highly publicized legal battle against Sunny, Michael entered this new chapter with more than just emotional conviction. He came armed with a precise understanding of how the system worked and what it would take to protect Scout. He had walked the tightrope of courtroom proceedings, family politics, and public opinion before, and emerged not only victorious but respected for his steady hand and principled stance. Now, with Scout's well-being hanging in the balance, he prepared to once again step into the legal arena, not to win a war of pride, but to offer sanctuary to a child who had been emotionally neglected by those entrusted with her care. Willow, who had once appeared to be a beacon of composure and maternal grace, found herself unraveling beneath the weight of mounting scrutiny. Her efforts to project a calm, controlled image were now being recast as cold detachment and clinical manipulation. Where others had once seen nurturing structure, they now saw the signs of emotional suppression. She had underestimated the emotional intelligence of children, believing that her veiled instructions and forced affections would be interpreted as care. But children, especially ones like Scout, who had already endured loss and instability, could sense insincerity more sharply than adults. Scout hadn't just seen through Willow, she had fled her. Perhaps most devastating of all for Willow was the realization that Carly had withdrawn her support. Carly, who had once defended her, brought her into the family fold, and trusted her around Wiley, was now distant. The silence between them was more damning than any confrontation. It was the silence of a mother who had weighed Willow's actions and found them irredeemable. Isolated from those who once offered her the benefit of the doubt, Willow now stood at the precipice of losing everything. Her public reputation, her standing in the family, and the role of mother that she had clung to as proof of her worth. The damage was no longer containable. Meanwhile, Drew, once revered for his honor and resilience, was spiraling in private, desperately trying to salvage the remnants of a reputation that had been slowly chipped away by truth. In a final attempt to ground himself, he sought out Jason. It was a moment filled with desperate hope. Drew, ever the man of action, had always respected Jason's stoic wisdom, believing that perhaps his brother would offer him guidance, or at least some measure of understanding. But Jason, who had watched the family fracture from afar, could no longer play the role of neutral observer. He looked Drew in the eyes, his expression colder than Drew had ever seen, and offered a single, cutting truth: you have to face what you've done. And this time, you don't get to control anyone. With that, Jason turned away, leaving Drew to confront the wreckage of his choices without the comfort of brotherly redemption. In the days that followed, the streets of Port Charles buzzed with speculation. It started as murmurs in cafes and grocery store lines, whispers that Scout had been seen attending a community fundraiser with Alexis and Danny. But as more sightings followed, Scout smiling in photos, walking confidently, engaging with friends and neighbors. The tone of the conversation shifted. What began as small-town gossip rapidly evolved into legal murmuring. Word spread that Alexis, along with Tracy and Michael, was preparing documentation to challenge custody, citing neglect, emotional instability, and failure to provide a safe and supportive environment for Scout. Public opinion began to turn, not in some orchestrated PR campaign, but in organic, heartfelt concern for a child who had finally found the courage to escape. And while the adults plotted their legal strategies and prepared for battle, Scout lived quietly in the warmth of the Quartermain estate, her courage cloaked in quiet resilience. She no longer needed to raise her voice to be heard, her choices had spoken volumes. She spent her mornings reading with Danny, her afternoons painting in the sunroom, and her evenings journaling, not to relive the trauma, but to process it. She wrote of her hope, small and private, that one day her father would truly see what his actions had done. That he would look beyond the hurt pride, beyond the loss of control, and recognize the pain his daughter had carried while trying to make him proud. But until that day came, Scout refused to return to the place that had suffocated her spirit. She no longer saw her escape as abandonment, it was reclamation. She had chosen truth over illusion, chosen love over obligation, and most importantly, she had chosen herself. In a world that often asked girls like her to stay quiet, to be small and compliant, Scout had done the hardest thing: she had left. Not in anger, not in rebellion, but in the pursuit of peace. And in doing so, she had forced the adults around her to look in the mirror, to confront their failures, and to face the rising tide of consequences that no amount of denial could wash away. And so, as the sun set over Port Charles, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds of the Quartermain estate and the fractured lives left behind, a quiet shift in power began to settle into place. The story of Scout's exodus had started as a ripple, an overlooked child choosing to speak, but it had grown into a reckoning that would reshape the lives of everyone who once assumed she would remain silent. Within the ornate walls of the Quartermain mansion, Scout no longer felt like a guest or a runaway, she felt rooted. Her presence was no longer defined by absence from another place, but by the strength it took to choose her own space, her own voice, and her own future. The echo of her bravery had traveled far beyond the rooms she used to inhabit. It had shaken the foundation of her father's identity, exposed the hollowness in Willow's carefully curated persona, and awakened something dormant in Michael, Alexis, and even Jason, each of whom now stood, whether quietly or boldly, in her corner. At the other end of town, Drew stood alone in a house that once bustled with purpose but now echoed with the absence of laughter, trust, and love. Every carefully crafted social media post, every public appearance he arranged for damage control only deepened the void Scout had left behind. The man who once believed he could win back everything with charm and persistence now found himself confronting a truth too bitter to spin. He had lost his daughter not to a court ruling, but to the slow erosion of her faith in him. And faith, once broken in a child's eyes, does not return on command. It must be earned, and perhaps, not by him. Willow, too, found herself forced into reflection. Without Carly's loyalty, without the protective shell of Drew's influence, she faced the piercing reality that intention does not excuse harm.